Welcome to a really popular topic for BDA Baby this week. I am really just thrilled by the amount of questions that we got for this topic, which tells me that this is a topic that we need to do more on, and it is the topic of co-parenting. I'm really excited, obviously, to talk to Eva about this because she has experience with this, and it also is such a big topic that so many people are dealing with. Oopsie. And want to know more about this topic. So I'm really excited. We're just going to dive right in because it's such a loaded one, and I have so many requests for questions. So we're going to go live. And hello. How are you?
Great. How are you doing? I'm so happy to see you.
I know. I'm so happy to see you too. I was actually thinking when I was posting about this yesterday, I was like, this is for me full circle because I think I started following you when you first, like so many years ago when I was like maybe just out of college, and I remember following you and being like, oh my gosh, I just like looked up to you so much, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's like the perfect mother, and I always admired how open and honest you were about everything, and then all these beautiful babies, and so I was pregnant at the tail end of your pregnancy, and so I was paying a lot of attention to all of that, and then boom, you were like, oh, and I'm also getting separated, and I'm very pregnant, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't like to do anything half-assed, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not. Yeah, so I want to go back because I know that and I've watched a lot of your Instagram lives that talked about divorce, which I think are so amazing and so helpful and informative for anybody who is interested in wanting to watch that, just how you talk about your experience, which you're a little over a year into, right?
So we separated in fall of 2019. So I'm 2 years from that, and then we got officially divorced in February of 2020, and then my son was born in March. So
Wow.
yeah, we're like, from when we separated and started co-parenting, I would say we're about a year and a half into it ish.
Okay. And so obviously you made the decision to separate while you were pregnant, which I heard on one of your Instagram lives. That's not something that you would recommend doing because that was probably very overwhelming.
Yeah.
But you and your ex-husband Kyle had been together. This was your third little one that you guys had, and can you just take us back a little bit to leading up to that decision, because it was obviously something that you announced to people, but also just the way that you announced it was so amicable, as you say, and as you've obviously been openly talking about. And I thought really well done of just being like very friendly and kind about the whole thing.
Yeah. So, Kyle and I met when I was 24, and we got married like very young. I mean, I was young. I like to remind him he's like 4 years older than me, so I like to. I'm younger and he's old. He just turned 40. So I don't know. I always think that's funny. But yeah. So anyway, we were super young, and we went through a lot together, and we grew up together, and had kids together, and nobody's relationship is perfect, obviously. But we just eventually really came to the decision and realization after many years of therapy, and which is something I highly recommend. Like, I am a huge proponent of marriage. I really believe in marriage, and I think marriage is amazing. I hope to be married again someday. But it's not really cut out for any two people, right? It's a really big commitment and a big sacrifice, and a lot needs to happen correctly. I know you're married to somebody who's been divorced, so I know you have a front seat. I know you have divorce in your family as well, and so do I. Right? So I come from a blended family. So my parents only have me together, and then my mom had 2 more kids, and my dad had a bunch more kids, and some are steps and some are halves, and we just have a very, very blended family. So I came from, that type of background, and an understanding that families can really be any way that you decide that you want them to be. And so, after a lot of work on our marriage, we were able to really lovingly realize that we really wanted to model a healthy relationships and a healthy marriage for our kids. And we also really wanted to show them us at our happiest selves.
Right.
So, and that was really important to us because for us, and look, no judgment to anybody who does things differently or sticks in marriages for a long time. Like everybody just has to do what they feel comfortable with, in my opinion. But for me, I just thought that, this idea of like staying together for the kids that people
Right.
see reinforce all the time, what are you really teaching them at that point? What are you showing them, right? And only you have the answer to that. Only you know your relationship and what kind of environment it's causing in your home. So, for us, it was a really hard decision, but one that was made with a lot of love to move forward in a different way as a family. And it took a lot of work. And especially, like I said, it's, we're very amicable. We're actually great friends now. I mean, he's like one of my best friends. Like I said, we grew up together, right? So it's like we have this rapport. But at the end of the day, we're really much better this way. And our kids for the past year and a half have seen us individually happy. And, they've seen us have a much healthier relationship, the two of us together in our current configuration than we were before. And like, I always preface this by saying like, it's not to say that it's always easy. It's not. It's like with any family relationship, right? There are times where you just, I liken it to like, it's weird to say, but like to like a sibling relationship. Sometimes you just want to kill them and they're so annoying, but at the end of the day, like they're your family. It's not like, you know what I mean? They're not gonna stop being your family. So you find a way to kind of move through it and adjust and forgive. And it's just this very organic type of relationship. And that's sort of the relationship that we've committed to with each other. So we really prioritize that and we make sure that our communication stays good. And, of course it has its ups and downs. Like we're divorced for a reason, clearly, as everybody is who's divorced. You don't like go through those steps because like, it's the easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But it really is. And I'm grateful that I have a co-parent that's as committed to putting the kids first as I am. And, you just have to come to it with that type of attitude, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I love this. I was listening to one of the conversations that you were having with a divorce coach, and I thought it was really interesting because I think a lot of people who are maybe in a marriage that's challenged or are looking back on a marriage and talking about this staying in it for the kids concept. And so I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it's so true that, what you're saying, which is like, what does that really mean? And if you guys are better and happier and you guys get along better outside of your marriage and as friends, then isn't that setting a better example for your children? And I think that feels to me to be generational because I feel like our parents' generation, it was much more like you got to just stay in it, and divorce was looked at as something completely different than what it is now. And this idea of, and also this amazing life that so many of us have where we can see these different versions of what families are and what you can make them, which I think is so great to be able to have that. And I remember growing up, I watched my uncle, who's an incredible stepfather, just deal with that. And I was like, I would watch him in awe of just like, how can you do that? How is it not? Because there's this idea that you have to hate your ex or not get along with your ex.
Right.
And I want to hear more about, because the questions that we got when it came to co-parenting.
Yeah.
I mean, just.
I know it, right? It's like.
It's a huge topic. And also the idea that you choose to co-parent, and people were asking about the shame around about choosing to co-parent. And I also was listening to this idea of when you made the decision to be amicable in your separation, really choosing and getting on the same page as Kyle of this being a business kind of a setting, that you guys took the emotion out of. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was such a great way of thinking of it.
I think, yeah, as I said, and I think, again, I'm grateful that Kyle is on the same page as me when it comes to that stuff. Because obviously when you're talking about divorce, you're talking about like really high running emotions, right?
Right.
So something takes people many more years than it took us to get to the place we're at. Not that we didn't have those many years of emotions at points of our marriage, we did, but I think that by the time we got to this point, we have children together. And when you have children together, you have like, you just have to focus on the commonalities that you have, right? You have so many differences, obviously, if you're at the point when you're getting divorced. But if you have children together, you have however many children you have, those beings are these people that you care about. You both care about them more than anybody else in the world, right? And that's a really strong bond. And you can work off of that. I think for us, we like to look at it, just to kind of put it in context, the level of respect that you need to really have with your co-parent when you're communicating and when you're thinking about things is, I've always said, it's like you're in a work setting. So, something can upset you. It does all the time at work, right? Or it can trigger you or frustrate you, but it's really important to engage with that person in a really respectful way, to really wait and think things over before you react. You're not going to send a crazy email to a coworker. You're not going to send a crazy text. You just have to reframe it as if like you two are now, like Kyle and I are not in an intimate relationship any longer. That includes physically, emotionally, everything, right? So like, he's not my emotional support system. I'm not his emotional support system. I'm also not his emotional punching bag. He's not mine, right? So it's like, you have to divert that energy and get a therapist or have a friend that you talk to all the time who can really help you through those moments, those really triggered moments. And then when you pivot and you're communicating with your co-parent, it needs to be coming from that place, because at the end of the day, forget what you're modeling for the kids. This is a lifelong relationship. Like it's when I always say, like, people don't realize getting divorced is easy. It's like when you have kids with someone, that's the real decision. That's the big deal, right? Because you're not for life. Yeah. You're not parents together. So, understanding that and just knowing this is a long journey. This isn't like, it's a long game. It's not like, oh, tit for tat doesn't really work. So it's just reframing it for yourself and figuring out what that goal is ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, because there's so many people who, I think especially as you go through an adjustment of, and I've seen this with a lot of my parents' friends and also just families that I've grown up with, is making that shift. And obviously it being easier said than done. As you said, you have an incredible co-parent that you're able to be on the same page with. But if you have a divorce or a dissolving of a marriage that's a very different setup than maybe the one that you have, that can take, much more time, or it can, things can happen in a relationship that make that setup more complicated. But do you ever have moments where you get really frustrated or challenged in your co-parenting journey?
Totally. And I think, we definitely, you come across, it's interesting because you come across the same stumbling blocks in co-parenting that you do in your marriage, right?
Yeah.
Like you're the same people, right? So it's like, depending on what those issues were, whether they're trust issues or control issues or whatever they are, they manifest themselves in the same way or in a similar, I would say. So, I mean, it really is about like self-examination, forgiveness. I know you have an amazing book about forgiveness. That's something that, really looking into that and looking into, the humility of divorce and, really considering your own role in the breakdown of that relationship. It's so important. It's really going into things and like just humanizing everyone and everything. It's like, that's the first step towards settling some of those differences, because they'll just come up over and over again. Like, I remember one time I heard a therapist say, not my therapist, she was somebody else's actually. And she said, fights in a marriage are really always about the same thing.
Mhm.
It manifests itself in different ways, but if you get down to the kernel, couples always have the same fight.
Right.
And that's that it's you're going to see it again. So just,
Mhm.
and it doesn't mean that once you resolve that in your co-parenting relationship that it's going to, make you feel like, oh, we could have stayed married. But sometimes taking the pressure off, or taking, like, for example, Kyle and I get along so much better now, and we're such good friends now, and I enjoy him so much now because, the things that drove me crazy about him aren't my problem anymore.
Right.
And like, so I can enjoy and all of the things about him that are so lovely and funny and
Right.
awesome,
Yeah.
and so, and I think maybe people don't understand that, but like a relationship, a relationship is one thing. A marriage is so many things. It's so complex, and so many things have to work together properly,
Right.
in order for it to be compatible and healthy and all these things. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really tough, it's always up and down. And even,
Yeah.
Allison was saying it, who I did my like little co-parenting chat, who she's been co-parenting for a while as well. And now she's expecting a baby with her new partner. And, it's an ever-changing relationship.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it is ever changing. And I think, from my experience and also just people that I've watched do it, it is, it does evolve, it changes, especially as the world changes, as people's lives change. And one of the big questions that people were asking with your experience with co-parenting is, if you are on a different page than
Oh
the
yeah.
person you're co-parenting with, like, what are I know that you and Kyle obviously seem to be really great about being on the same page, but is there any advice that you would give to somebody based on, maybe your experience with it yourself, or just talking to other people about it, that you would give to make sure, because I think for most people, and for myself, it's all about, what's best for the child,
Yeah.
or the kids that are involved, whatever your situation is. But when you have a situation where, people are asking if someone's not on the same page as you with parenting
Mhm.
things, or if the households are different with parenting things, how do
Mhm.
you get someone to be on the same page as you with parenting to make everything cohesive?
Well, again, I'm not an expert, obviously, on any of this, but just what I've learned through my own experience is you really have to pick your battles.
Right.
At the end of the day, if something's not a life-threatening issue, if it's really not like, oh, it could be, but like if it's not a life-threatening issue, we have to remember, like, maybe that's your kernel. Maybe it's about letting go. Maybe it's a control thing. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? You really have to examine, like, is this about me, or is this about my child?
Mhm.
Is this my comfort level or their comfort level? And I think
Mhm.
the thing that we have to really understand, that I always say about parenting in this day and age is, we tend to over focus on like the perfect comfort of the child, in my opinion. So
Right.
like, you know, for example, it's all, when we were growing up, it was like, it wasn't so much a focus on that. Like, obviously our parents wanted us to be comfortable and whatever, but it wasn't, the whole world wasn't set. We didn't have iPads. Like, the second we were
Yeah.
bored, it's pulled out an iPad, to put on somebody's lap. It's like, it's okay for kids to have life experiences that aren't totally perfect all the
Mhm.
time. Like, it's okay for them to show up at their dad's house or their mom's house or whatever. Like, they don't have their perfect breakfast for the next morning, or they don't have, they have to wear the same clothes for 2 days or whatever. Like, these are life experiences that we collect as human beings. And like, there's so much that we learn through adversity. And I think that sometimes, this generation of parents, and I'm talking about my own generation, it's like we sometimes over focus sometimes on like, on this idea of like, our kids' lives have to go smoothly, or
Right.
everything has to be, perfect and educational and everything. But it's like, kids at the end of the day are super resilient.
Mhm.
They understand more than we realize. And,
Right.
it's really important for each parent to have their own way that they do things
Mhm.
too. Like, the way that Kyle, and this was one of my big learning things in our co-parenting journey, is I definitely had to learn and witness that, you know, like Kyle's way is not my way. We have always been very different parenting wise. And what I came to realize through co-parenting is like the kids are going to go there, like it's not going to be the way I do it. It's going to be a different way. Right. But his is fine. You know, like it's not going to kill them. It's just different than mine.
Right.
And as long as he's, you know, making sure they're safe, fed, loved, you know, that it is what it is. Do they come home and they're like a little, like, you know, dirtier than they are at my house and like everything's bag? And, you know, and he'll say, this is nothing he wouldn't tell you, but he'll be like, you know, they eat like a lot of ramen and mac and cheese and all this kind of stuff. Hey, like, it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, I, you know, can suggest he get like a Flintstone vitamin for them to have while they're there. And he either does or he doesn't. You know what I mean? And that's his thing. And he is making his memories with them. And that is his parenting style. And it's more important that they really feel that their dad has his parenting style and has a voice in their parent, you know, in their parenting than it is that I've like forced my way on him. You know what I mean? So that was something I really learned. And now I look at it and I think it's just so beautiful that like we both have these very different styles and the kids get something from both of those, right? Because they're three different people from each other and from us. Yeah. And I think is the best way might not be what my daughter responds best to. Maybe it's what one of my sons responds best to. Maybe Kyle's way is perfect for Marlo, my daughter. You know, it's like, you just don't know. And anyway, it's always the things we think we're doing right that our kids are in therapy for 20 years. It's the things that we're like, oh, let me pat myself on the back. I'm amazing. And then they're like, mom made us wear matching pajamas every Christmas.
Oh, boy. Yeah, no, I think it's so true. It's, you know, this, I think Instagram and the, you know, the internet and all the information that we have is so great. And it's also, can make things more challenging. And I agree that part of like, you know, making sure everything when it comes to raising your children, you know, in separate households or in one household goes a certain way, or there are specific things that you hit or do every single day to be the perfect parent or to have the healthiest child. It's true that of course kids are resilient, but also, you know, celebrating different people's way of parenting and knowing that, you know, your way of parenting might not work for your co-parent and that's okay. And being able to honor those different things and allowing your kid to have different experiences. Because I had so many friends growing up in high school whose parents were separated or divorced and the households were so different, but it was also kind of what made it fun.
Yeah. You know, there are things that I wouldn't even attempt because they would make me like so anxious. Like, for example, Kyle last weekend had the kids, right? It was one of his weekends. He gets them every other weekend. And he took all three kids in 90-degree heat to Coney Island for the first time. Okay. So a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old alone, no help, no babysitter, no friends. He took them. That idea would make me so anxious. Not like that something would happen to them, but like the idea of being in the driving there, like hot, them somebody melting down, and like how would I feed them? Like I would never even attempt that because I would be like, no, like I'll have a meltdown. You know what I mean? Yeah. He did it great. They all had fun. They had a blast. Like they rode the rides. I mean, it was the perfect example of why, you know, his way is great. Right. You know, and great for the kids and whatever, because they had an experience that I would have never given them. Yeah. So perfect. You know what I mean?
No, it's true. How do you, because your oldest daughter, Marlo, is how old right now?
So she's 6, about to be 7.
So how do you explain, because she's not obviously old enough to be totally aware of asking certain questions, but how do you explain that to her, or, you know, I mean, obviously the boys are kind of much younger, but how do you explain that to her to make her feel, you know, of course, loved at both households, but also not a sense of, you know, of loyalty to one person over another, or weird about going to someone's house, or weird about having fun.
I think that, you know, us being so on the same page and
Right.
good with each other really helps with that. Because, you know, and it's really important to me and to Kyle that we always, you know, like Kyle is very present in our household, even when he's not. Like I have pictures of him with the kids and of us as a family. And, you know, even though like I'm in a new, for anybody who, you know, doesn't follow me, like I'm in a new relationship. I have a boyfriend who spends a lot of time with the kids and with Kyle and with me. And like, we still have pictures of, you know, Kyle here. We spend holidays. Kyle comes over to the house for holidays when I have the kids. We do birthday parties together. And so I think that the kids really, they definitely don't feel any need to like, uh, you know, preserve our feelings or anything like that, which is great, which is, you know, I feel really happy about. But you know, there are things that come up. It's tough as she gets older. What's the most challenging? And I actually talked about this. So I do like little co-parenting sort of updates on my blog, like every 4 months or so. And the one recently I talked about, you know, the issue we're now getting into, because, oh, sorry, for also for people who don't know, I live in Connecticut. Kyle lives in New York City.
Right.
So we live about an hour and a half away from each other, which is challenging, right? So our custody schedule, and I always like to talk about this kind of stuff because I think it's really important to show people that there are different ways of doing things, you know, and just because nobody knows what anybody else is doing. So
Yeah.
For those of you who are thinking about this or going through it, so we do every other weekend schedule, and then Kyle actually comes to see the kids on Wednesdays after school and hangs out with them at my house from Wednesdays after school, puts them to bed. And then actually recently, sometimes like if I want to go out with my girlfriends, he's been like staying and watching them for me while like I go out, and then I can come back and then he leaves. So he's also been like, I mean, it's ridiculous to call it a babysitter because they're his kids, but he's been doing me and like helping me if I want to, you know, get together with girlfriends or so that's been really nice. So that's our, you know, kind of our schedule. So right now the really tough thing has been that Marlo is doing soccer, right? Town soccer. And she did it. She actually, this weekend's her last game, but she did it in the fall as well. And what's tough is that that's every weekend and she really did. And so, you know, it's really hard for him, and he does do it, to drive her an hour and a half back here on Saturdays, then an hour and a half there. He has to get somebody to watch the boys in the city because it's, you know, a nightmare to drive like a 1-year-old 3 hours in the car weekend. So that's, you know, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do about that because, you know, it's sports, it's going to be birthday parties, you know, because the last year and a half hasn't been typical, right? There haven't been events or like birthday parties really, but now that that's starting up again, that's something that we have to figure out. So like I said, it's sort of this ever evolving organic organism that you just have to really maintain in terms of like the relationship, the vibe, what's working, what's not working. And we just sort of check in and we make sure to tell the other one, you know, if something's come up, if one of the kids like said something or asked a question or whatever. And we just communicate a lot. I think it's really important. I mean, at the end of the day, I think everyone can put themselves aside for the sake of their kids and get to the place.
Yeah, I mean, I think another, of course, big topic that came up with people is just wanting to know what to do about dealing with a co-parent that you're trying to co-parent with who doesn't want to communicate. And I think obviously that makes it so much more challenging because it seems that the real, you know, thread that is keeping you and Kyle having such an amicable divorce and amazing environment for your children is a great line of communication between the two of you.
It hasn't always, we've had ups and downs in terms of communication also. You know, I think the thing to remember if you are the one wanting to communicate and the other person isn't, is that might be because they're in pain. You know, it could be because it's painful. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to be a jerk or rude or whatever, but they're, you know, when you're talking about real emotions and, you know, real human hearts, it's they just could be in a place where they need to keep things really transactional.
Right.
And that's okay. You know, I always say it's like, it's such a long, you really have to look at it as a long game and keep an open heart and just remember that every week or month or year isn't going to be great in this relationship. The same way in a marriage, every week or month or year isn't going to be great, right? You have to really just reframe it for the long term and think, what might be some generous ways that I can open my heart to what this person is communicating to me via their behavior, right?
Right.
And it's also a respect thing for your kids. I think, at the end of the day, I block people who say rude things about Kyle on my Instagram page. I, have had conversations with people, I encounter in my life, like acquaintances or people making little comments, because at the end of the day, that's disrespectful to my children. That's their father. I don't allow people to disparage him in my presence, or, of course I get frustrated with him. And of course I've said, had conversations with my girlfriends and my people when I, want to kill him, of course. But I don't allow people publicly to disparage him in my presence, or obviously around the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, at the end of the day, it really is a respect thing with the kids. I think, every kid deserves their own opportunity to decide who their parent is to them and to have that own relationship. And it's really not my position, or especially it's not some random person's position to help guide that.
Yeah.
So I feel very strongly about that. And I think, in these relationships, when it comes to the kids and co-parenting, you really have to put out the energy you want to receive back. So that thing, right, is it is a leap of faith control wise. You can't control what your co-parent is doing in their time. You just can't. No matter how hard you try.
Right.
No court is going to tell you oh yeah, you can tell somebody's other parent what to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's a leap of faith. And so what you do have control over is your own behavior, and you just have to model that behavior that you want to see reflected back to you. And whether it's immediate or whether it takes years, I believe, because I believe the best in people, I really do believe that will come around, and that if you lead with kindness and generosity, that eventually that will come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I know that we're running out of time, but I also, since you brought up the fact that you have a boyfriend, that you're in this new relationship, does that change your co-parenting dynamic at all, or has that not been affected?
No, actually it's gotten a lot better.
That's so great.
I have my boyfriend. I think that, I don't know, again, it's so much about the people involved, my boyfriend is so generous about the situation and so loving, and he's such an empath, which I think really helps. And Kyle's been so generous with Ian, my boyfriend, as well. They both have come to it because they know that, obviously Ian knows that's my kid's father, and he's really close to the kids, and he's, he understands how important Kyle is to the kids and to me. And Kyle understands how important Ian is to the kids and to me. And so, I think they just have been grown-ups about it.
Yeah.
And, I think that in a lot of, I'm also always of the mind, because I grew up in a blended family, I've really internalized over the course of my life that the more people loving a child, the better for the child.
Right.
I really have seen the effects of that. I've lived it, right? Because my dad didn't really raise me, my biological dad. I was mostly raised by my stepdad, and I'm very close with, my step siblings and my half siblings who, some of them were mostly raised by my biological dad and not their biological, you know what I mean? It's
right.
a mishmash of love and care.
Yeah.
So I think because I really understood that on a cellular level, I really just believe in allowing kids to open their hearts to new people, and that's ultimately such a beautiful thing to watch. And, I know it's not typical necessarily, the situation that we have, but we have we have a great time. I mean, we spend holidays together, and for my birthday, Kyle brought sushi to the house. And then we have this like playhouse that's set up like a diner. It's like a little mini diner.
That's amazing.
And like he and the kids went out and set it up like romantic style, which was not really that romantic, but it was like candle, like they've got like votive candles everywhere.
That's so sweet.
Got, like, a bottle of wine and a tablecloth, and they set it up for me and Ian to have dinner there. And then they like brought from the house the food into the diner.
That's so cute.
And you know, I shared it on Instagram because I was like, this is just amazing. Like, is this where I thought my life would be like 3 years ago? No, it's not by any means, but it's a lot better than my life was. I'll tell you that. Right.
Right.
So yeah, I think, you know, I try to thank Kyle for his generosity when it comes up. Like, that's the other thing, is you just want to be courteous. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Kind, and these things that like I think sometimes we forget about in our marriage is, I mean, not you, because you're a newlywed, and also I'm sure you're a very lovely wife to begin with, but you know, but I feel like we forget in these like long-term marriages, and Kyle and I were together for a decade, and like we're definitely more courteous with each other now than we were when we were married, especially towards the end, you know?
Yeah.
So
I mean, that makes it just like so much better, I think, for people who you know, I just, there are so many people who are like, I'm doing this for the kids. And then you look at a situation like yourself where you're like, I get along better now with Kyle, and we're happier together, and we co-parent better together. And it's obviously setting a great example for your children of what co-parenting can look like, and also what a healthy relationship can look like, and that there isn't one specific kind of relationship, and that, you know, maybe you guys aren't married, but that, you know, you guys can be on the same page and can co-parent and do it in a way where you're treating each other kindly and with respect, which I think just makes such a big difference for that kind of environment. And I could not agree more with you when you say that it's all about, you know, having the children or the kids involved be as loved as possible, because at the end of the day, I think if everybody's on the same page of wanting to do what's best for the child or for the kids, or wanting them to feel the most loved all the time, of course there will be bumps along the way, but if everybody comes at it from that angle and from that mindset, then it makes it such a better experience of wanting the kid to just feel loved 24/7. And I always ask my uncle whenever I have like questions about things. I always ask him, because I think he has done such a great job being a step parent. And he's always like, it's all about just loving the heck out of a kid. And I think that seems like, of course, what you and Kyle want, but also when you have a boyfriend, like you have, that's his mindset as well, which I think is just such a beautiful thing for your kids and for you, Kyle.
It's great. And honestly, like, you know, Kyle and I always say that's the real challenge, is finding the people to fit into this dynamic, right? Because this dynamic is definitely what's best for the kids, right? Kyle getting along, and the kids seeing that is what's best for my kids. Mm-hmm. So now it's like, it's not easy to find people who are not threatened by that, and who are good with that and all that. So, you know, I think that will be the ongoing thing, is as we, you know, if I get married and if Kyle gets married again and all these things, and as we sort of solidify those relationships, you know, as you all know, obviously, it's really about, then it's, you know, more and more people do the dynamic. Mm-hmm. And it's just, you know, again, like, it's just about communication and honesty, even if it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And a lot of like really uncomfortable things come up all the time. Like, of course they do, you know, like really, like Marlo the other day, I left for like 2 seconds and Ian was putting her to bed. And I went to like get them waters or something. And I come back in and she's like, okay, Mom, I got the answer. I said to Ian, when is he marrying you? And and I was like, oh my God, like, no. Why are you?
You're like, good job, Marlo.
Like, you are so awkward. Like, now this is, I was like, oh my God, you know? And obviously it wasn't, you know, I wasn't like really embarrassed, because obviously we're very close and it's not like those things haven't come up, but But you know, it's like it's just, you never know what's gonna happen,
Yeah.
or you know, when you have people, and Ian and I don't live together, but I'm sure, you know, if that, you know, when that happens, then it'll be a whole thing. That's a whole adjustment. I mean, you know, you've lived through all of this,
Yeah.
but it's, you know, it's a whole like thing. And there's reasons why there are movies about it and books about it. And the
I
whole,
know. It's so true.
you know, it's a complex experience. But ultimately, I think you touched on something really important, which is that it's really important for kids these days to, you know, these new generations to grow up understanding that like there's no right way to have a relationship. That includes gender, it includes
Right.
sexual orientation, it includes family structure. You really can make the life you want, because
Yeah.
I think ultimately, to be very healthy, it's all about really tapping into, as a human being, like what really makes you happy,
Yeah.
and you comfortable, and what makes you shine, and what makes you be able to love the people you love the best and the easiest, and all that kind of stuff. And I would never want my kids to feel like they have to stay in a relationship that isn't working, or, you know, to think that, you know, certain things in a relationship are normal that I don't want them to normalize, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Um, I think that really is the most important thing. And when we look at, you know, people ask me all the time, and it's such a hard thing to even talk about because every relationship is different. But the number one question I get is like, how did you know it was time? How did you know it was time, you know, in terms of getting divorced? And I always say, like, if you're asking yourself that question, you know,
Yeah.
first of all, you know, that's sort of a redundancy, right? Is like, if you're looking for someone else to tell you it's okay, I think your brain is already working that out for yourself. But also, there's no right way, there's no right timeline. I think it's just about, if you, and look, if you don't have children, then I can't really speak about that. But if you do have children, it's really just about what are you showing them? What are you modeling for them? What do you want them to learn from their childhood experience? What do you want them to imprint from, you know, their family of origin? And it's those kind of questions, if you're in that sort of middle ground place of thinking about things, even if you're thinking about them with your partner and talking about them, you know, you really have to come to that conclusion together. Like, what are you doing? What is your marriage serving at this point?
Yeah.
And for everybody, that's a different call. And there's no right way. Like, I totally am here for people like working on their marriages for like 30 years and going through like 20 bad years, but then having 10 great ones at the end. Like, great. Like,
Yeah.
that's amazing. You know, like, that's what you want to do. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And there really isn't any like judgment and no right way to do things. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's just about being happy and finding a way to live your truth and have your kids witness that.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful gift to give your children and obviously to yourself as well. But I think that it's such a great example that you're setting of this new way of co-parenting, and also being so open about the fact that there are so many different ways to do that, and not being judgmental towards other people's ways of co-parenting, or, you know, having blended families or having boundaried families or whatever that is. And obviously you've grown up in it, so you have an idea of what that looks like, but also, you know, what it looks like for your family right now might be different than what it looks like in 5 years or 10 years, and just kind of, you know, going with the flow, but always having that respect and love, and most importantly, making sure that your children are loved is such a incredible thing. So thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom. It's been amazing.
More people should talk about it. So
100%. I was saying that because I was talking to my mom right before I was gonna come on and talk to you, and I was like, it's just such an important topic that I think people should talk more about, and you do such an incredible job of talking about it. And I think anybody who wants to know more about it, the conversations you have on your page are super informative, and also just really well done. But just being so open about talking about it, because it is, you know, it is a little bit of a generational thing. Like, our parents' generation wouldn't be talking about something like this, or making people feel empowered to have these new versions of family dynamics. And just because it wasn't something that they talked about or that they were familiar with, not any other reason. But it's a gift to people who are, might be in situations that they don't know how to navigate, or want things to be better than they might be right now, or how to go about certain things. And you and Kyle are doing such a great job. And I think it's a beautiful gift to your children, and it's a great gift to people who are following you, because it's very informative, and it's like the positive energy from it is contagious. So it's a great thing. So thank you so much for coming on to talk about it. And I feel like we're gonna have to do it again, because there were so many questions we didn't get to.
Totally. I mean, I'm down to do that. And I think, I agree. I think the more that people can see, it's like with anything. It's like if you only ever saw one hairstyle and you thought you had to wear your hair like that, you know
Right.
what I mean? Your whole life. It's like you learn what works for you by learning about what other people are doing. And there's no way to do that if you don't hear about what other,
Yeah.
because unless you've been through a divorce yourself, So so I'm grateful that you are doing talks like these, and I think it's awesome. And I would love it, and we'll do it again sometime.
Awesome. I would love that. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. I'll talk to you.
Bye.